At the Thanksgiving dinner invitation, my son was clear. You'll clean up afterward? So I said no. Good luck with your dinner. What should have been a celebration turned into a nightmare. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored paper stock that Amelia recognized immediately. The same expensive stationery Daisy had used for her wedding announcements, her baby showers, every milestone that demanded acknowledgement but never reciprocated gratitude. Amelia's fingers traced the embossed lettering as she stood in her small kitchen, morning coffee growing cold on the counter. You are cordially invited to celebrate Thanksgiving at the field residence. Please arrive at 2 p.m. sharp. Traditional dress requested. Traditional dress? As if Amelia didn't know how to dress for her own family's gathering. As if the woman who had raised 3 children and hosted 27 Thanksgivings before Daisy took over needed instruction on propriety. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in with their faded yellow paint and outdated appliances. At 62, Amelia had grown accustomed to this downsized life, the modest apartment she'd moved to after selling the family home to help Steve through his divorce, the careful budgeting that stretched her Social Security and part-time bookkeeping income, the quiet evenings that once bustled with family chaos. But the invitation in her hands made the reduction of her circumstances feel deliberate, calculated. She walked to the living room window, looking out at the November gray that settled over Columbus like a shroud. 3 floors down, the parking lot held her 15-year-old Honda, its paint oxidized and bumper held on with zip ties after last month's fender bender. The repair estimate had been $800, money she didn't have, couldn't spare, wouldn't ask for. Not anymore. The phone rang. Daisy's ringtone, a cheerful chime Amelia had assigned years ago when she still believed in the possibility of friendship with her daughter-in-law. "Hi, Mom Field." The voice carried that particular tone of practiced patience, the one Daisy used when speaking to elderly relatives or service workers. "Did you get the invitation?" "I did." Amelia kept her voice neutral, giving nothing away. "Wonderful. I wanted to make sure you understood about the timing. We're doing things a bit differently this year, more structured. The children will eat first at 2, adults at 3:30, and we'll need you to help with cleanup afterward, since you're not bringing anyone this year." The casual cruelty of it landed like a slap. Since Albie's death 2 years ago, Amelia had attended family gatherings alone, her widowhood apparently marking her as available labor rather than deserving of consideration. "I see." Amelia's reflection in the window showed a woman who looked older than her years. Silver hair pulled back severely, shoulders curved inward as if protecting against repeated blows. When had she started looking so diminished? "Oh, and Mom Field, I know you usually bring that green bean casserole, but I've already planned the menu. Maybe just bring dinner rolls from the grocery store. Nothing fancy. We don't want to overwhelm the children with too many choices." Green bean casserole? The dish Amelia had perfected over 30 decades, the one Steve had requested every holiday, the recipe she taught her own mother, now relegated to grocery store dinner rolls. "Actually, Daisy, Oh, I'm so sorry, but I have to run. The caterer's here for the tasting. See you Thursday." The line went dead, leaving Amelia holding the phone like evidence of a crime. She set it down carefully, her hands trembling with something that might have been rage or might have been grief. In the silence that followed, memories crowded in uninvited. Steve at 8 begging her to make the good green beans for his birthday dinner instead of cake. Francine at 16 bringing boyfriends home specifically for Amelia's holiday meals, bragging about her mother's cooking. Even James, her youngest, calling from college to get the exact recipe because his roommates wouldn't believe his mom made the world's best casserole. When had she become dispensable? When had her contributions become inconveniences? Amelia walked to her bedroom closet, pushing past the practical clothes she wore to her part-time job at the tax office. The comfortable sweaters and sensible shoes that had replaced the wardrobe of a woman who mattered. In the back, wrapped in dry cleaning plastic, hung the burgundy dress she'd worn to Francine's wedding. It still fit, though she'd lost weight these past 2 years. Not from vanity, but from the kind of stress that made food taste like ash. She held the dress against herself in the mirror, remembering the woman who had worn it 4 years ago. That Amelia had walked Francine down the aisle because her father was already too sick to make the journey. That Amelia had paid for the flowers when the wedding budget came up short. That Amelia had held her breath when Francine's new husband made his toast, hoping for acknowledgement, for gratitude, for recognition of the sacrifices that had made the day possible. The toast had been about how beautiful Francine looked, how lucky he felt, how excited they were to start their new life together. Amelia hadn't been mentioned. She hung the dress back up, her movements mechanical. Traditional dress requested, as if she were a stranger to her own family's expectations. The kitchen called her back, and she found herself opening the recipe box, the same wooden box her mother had given her as a wedding gift 43 years ago. Her fingers found the card automatically. Amelia's green bean casserole, written in her younger self's careful script. The edges soft with handling, small stains marking decades of holiday preparations. She could make it anyway, show up with the dish that had been the centerpiece of their family table for as long as any of them could remember. Force Daisy to find room on her perfectly planned menu, make Steve choose between his wife's control and his mother's tradition. But even as she considered it, Amelia knew she wouldn't. The thought of Daisy's tight smile, of being made to feel foolish for bringing unwanted food, of her grandchildren watching their mother's disapproval, it was too much. She had been diminished enough. Instead, she found herself at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing a shopping list. Dinner rolls, the cheap kind from the day-old rack, flowers for the hostess, nothing too expensive, a bottle of wine, mid-shelf, appropriate but not presumptuous. The list looked pathetic, the offerings of someone grateful just to be included. Amelia's phone buzzed with a text message from Steve. "Looking forward to seeing you Thursday, Mom. Daisy's been planning for weeks." She stared at the message, looking for warmth, for a connection, for any sign that her eldest child remembered she was more than a woman who brought grocery store rolls. But there was nothing there except polite distance, the kind of message you might send to an elderly aunt you saw once a year. Outside, the November sky had darkened to match her mood. In 6 hours, her shift at the tax office would begin. 4 hours of organizing receipts and answering phones from Mr. Smothy, whose chronic complaints about her speed and accuracy had grown worse since he'd learned about her age. At 73, he seemed to take perverse pleasure in making her feel incompetent, as if her need for the job made her fair game for his frustrations. But she needed the job. The money from selling the house had gone to Steve's legal fees and Francine's wedding, and James's medical school tuition had consumed her savings. What remained barely covered her apartment rent and basic expenses. She couldn't afford pride, couldn't afford to push back against Daisy's condescension or Mr. Timothy's casual cruelty. Could she? The question hung in the air like smoke, dangerous and intoxicating. When had she become someone who accepted dinner roll assignments and cleanup duty? When had her family stopped seeing her as a person worthy of consideration? Amelia looked around her small apartment at the furniture she'd kept when downsizing, pieces chosen for function over beauty, for fitting into smaller spaces rather than creating a home. The family photos scattered on the bookshelf showed happier times, birthdays and graduations and holidays when she had been the center of the action, the one everyone looked to for stability and warmth. Now she was an invited guest to someone else's version of her family's traditions. The realization settled over her like cold water, shocking in its clarity. She had allowed this to happen through years of saying yes when she meant no, of accepting less than she deserved, of prioritizing everyone else's comfort over her own dignity. She had taught them that she was dispensable, and they had learned the lesson well. Amelia folded the invitation carefully and placed it on her refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like Ohio. 2 days until Thanksgiving. 2 days to decide whether she would continue accepting the role they had assigned her or whether it was time to write a different script entirely. The apartment felt different suddenly, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. For the first time in months, Amelia felt something other than resignation. The tax office smelled like burnt coffee and industrial carpet, a combination that had once been merely unpleasant, but now felt like the scent of her diminished circumstances. Amelia sat at her metal desk, processing the endless stream of receipts that small business owners brought in like offerings to some bureaucratic god, when her phone buzzed with another text. This one was from Francine. "Mom, Daisy mentioned you're just bringing rolls Thursday? Maybe grab some butter too. Thanks." The heart emoji felt like mockery. Amelia stared at the message until her vision blurred, then set the phone face down on her desk. Even her youngest daughter had absorbed Daisy's casual dismissal of her capabilities. When had Francine stopped seeing her as the woman who potty trained her, taught her to drive, held her hair back during teenage heartbreaks? When had she become just mom in a text message, relegated to grocery store errands? Amelia Field. Mr. Timothy's voice cracked across the office like a whip. "What's taking so long with the Henderson file? My grandmother could move faster and she's been dead 20 years. Amelia's hands stilled on the keyboard. 6 months ago, she would have apologized, made some excuse about the complexity of the receipts or her computer running slowly. Today, something cold and precise settled behind her ribs. "I'm ensuring accuracy, Mr. Timothy. I assumed you preferred that over speed, given how often you've mentioned your standards." The silence that followed stretched, thin and dangerous. Timothy's face reddened above his cheap tie, and Amelia could see him recalibrating, trying to determine whether she had just challenged him or simply stated a fact. "Well," he sputtered finally, "just get it done." Amelia returned to her work, but something had shifted. The words had come out of her mouth without permission, cool and professional, and completely unlike the deferential woman she'd trained herself to be. It felt dangerous and exhilarating, like taking a step to a cliff edge. During her lunch break, she drove to the grocery store where she was supposed to buy dinner rolls. The bread aisle stretched before her, rows of mass-produced mediocrity in plastic bags. She picked up a package of generic rolls, their softness giving way under her fingers like disappointment made edible. At the checkout, the teenager scanning her items looked at the pathetic collection: rolls, butter, a $5 bottle of wine, with the bored indifference of someone who couldn't imagine being 62 and grateful for an invitation to your own family's holiday. "That'll be $12.47, he said, not bothering to look at her. Amelia handed over the money, crisp bills from her carefully managed budget, and felt something crack inside her chest. $12.47? That was what she was worth to her family. Less than the cost of a movie ticket, a fraction of what Daisy probably spent on appetizers that no one would remember eating. She sat in her car in the parking lot, engine running but going nowhere, staring at the bag of rolls on her passenger seat. Through the windshield, she watched other shoppers loading their cars with turkeys and vegetables, pies and wine, the abundance of people who mattered enough to feed properly. Her phone rang. Steve this time. "Hey, Mom."
His voice carried that particular brand of exhaustion that came from a man trying to manage too many competing demands. Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up about Thursday. Daisy's parents are coming, and her sister with the new baby, so it's going to be pretty crowded. You might want to plan on leaving right after dessert. Traffic gets crazy on Thanksgiving night. The careful choreography of her dismissal was breathtaking in its efficiency. Arrive at 2, help serve, clean up, leave after dessert. Maximum utility, minimum inconvenience. I see, Amelia said, watching a woman her age load a cart full of grocery bags into a minivan, probably heading home to prepare for her own family gathering where she would be the star, not the help. And Mom, maybe park on the street instead of the driveway. With all the extra cars, it'll just be easier for everyone. Park on the street like a stranger? Like someone whose comfort didn't merit consideration? Steve, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Do you remember the first Thanksgiving after your father and I were married? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? I mean, I wasn't born yet. So we had $43 to our name. $43 for groceries, rent, everything. But I bought a 12-pound turkey anyway, and your father's parents came over, and his grandmother, who could barely walk anymore. I made everything from scratch because we couldn't afford anything else. Stuffing with day-old bread, cranberry sauce from actual cranberries, pumpkin pie with filling I made myself. She could hear him breathing on the other end, probably wondering where this was going, why his mother was telling stories when he had called with logistics. Your father's mother, your grandmother, told me it was the best Thanksgiving dinner she'd ever had. Not because the food was perfect, but because I had poured everything I had into making them feel welcome, into making it matter. Mom, that's really nice, but I've been thinking about that lately. Amelia continued, her voice cutting through his attempt to redirect, about the difference between being welcome and being useful, about what it means when someone assigns you dinner roles instead of asking what you'd like to bring. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 37 years of unspoken expectations and accumulated resentments. Daisy worked really hard planning this dinner, Mom. She's trying to make everything perfect for the family. The family. As if Amelia weren't part of it. As if she were an add-on. An obligation to be managed rather than a person to be celebrated. I'm sure she did, Amelia said. Tell me, Steve, when was the last time you asked how I was doing? Really asked. Not just a polite question you ask when you call about logistics or favors. Another silence, longer this time. We talk all the time, Mom. We exchange information. You tell me about work stress and the kids' activities and Daisy's projects. I listen and make appropriate noises. But when was the last time you asked about my life? About whether I'm happy or lonely or struggling with anything more complex than traffic on Thanksgiving night? She could picture him in his kitchen, the one she had helped him pick out when he bought the house before Daisy decided all decision-making would flow through her. Shifting uncomfortably, wanting to end this conversation and return to the simpler dynamic where she accepted whatever role he assigned her. Mom, you seem fine. You've always been capable, independent. We didn't think. You didn't think. The words came out sharp enough to cut. That's the problem, Steve. You stopped thinking about me as a person with feelings and needs and started thinking about me as a resource to be managed. When did that happen? That's not fair. His voice carried a note of injured righteousness that she recognized, the same tone he used as a child when caught in misbehavior. We include you in everything. You're always invited to bring dinner rolls and leave early so I don't inconvenience the important guests. Daisy's parents are important to us. They don't get to see the kids very often. And I do. Amelia's voice rose, despite her efforts to remain controlled. Steve, I haven't had a real conversation with my grandkids in months. Robin barely looks up from her phone when I'm there. And Max acts like I'm furniture. When did I become the grandmother they tolerate instead of the one they run to? You're being dramatic, Mom. The kids love you. The kids are polite to me. There's a difference. The parking lot around her had emptied while they talked, the afternoon shoppers giving way to the evening crowd.
In a few hours, she would go home to her small apartment and heat up a frozen dinner while other women her age put finishing touches on feast preparations, their kitchens full of the warm chaos of family anticipation. Look, Steve said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I don't know what brought this on, but Thursday isn't the time for family drama. Can we just have a nice, normal holiday? Normal. As if the careful diminishment of her role, the systematic erosion of her importance was normal. As if accepting leftovers from her own family's affection was something she should do quietly and gratefully. You're right, Amelia said finally. Thursday isn't the time for drama. She could hear his relief through the phone. Good, great. So we'll see you at 2. Amelia looked at the bag of dinner rolls beside her, their plastic wrapper catching the last of the afternoon lights. $12.47. Park on the street, leave after dessert. You know what, Steve? I think I'm going to pass on Thursday. The words came out calmly, matter-of-factly, as if she were declining an invitation from acquaintances rather than her own family's holiday celebration. What? Mom, you can't just... What do you mean you're passing? I mean, I have other plans. It was a lie when she said it, but it felt like the first honest thing she'd said to him in years. What other plans? You don't... I mean, where else would you go? The assumption in his voice that she had nowhere else to be, no life outside of her utility to his family, landed like a physical blow. But instead of the familiar ache of diminishment, Amelia felt something sharper and more energizing. The cold, precise fury of someone who had finally had enough. I'll figure something out, she said. Tell Daisy not to worry about setting a place for me. She hung up before he could respond, before he could explain or justify or make her feel guilty for disrupting their carefully orchestrated vision of family harmony. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear. Amelia's apartment had never felt more quiet than it did Thursday morning. No frantic cooking sounds from the kitchen, no lists taped to the refrigerator, no parade of family members calling to ask what time they should arrive, just silence, and the faint smell of her neighbor's bacon drifting through thin walls. She sat at her small dining table with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at her phone, 7 missed calls from Steve, 3 from Francine, and a text from Daisy that managed to be passive-aggressive even in emoji form. So disappointed you won't be joining us. Hope you feel better soon. Feel better? As if her absence were due to illness rather than choice. As if the problem were her health rather than their treatment of her. Amelia had lied about having other plans. But lies had a way of becoming truth if you were brave enough to make them real. She dressed carefully in her burgundy dress, not for them, but for herself, and walked to her car with no destination in mind except away. Downtown Columbus was deserted, the way cities become on holidays when everyone retreats to private celebrations. She drove past the State House, past the empty offices where people normally rush through lives too busy for connection, and found herself parking near the Scioto River, where she and Albie used to walk on Sunday afternoons. The walking path was nearly empty, except for a few joggers and an elderly man feeding ducks, despite the posted signs prohibiting it. Amelia sat on a bench and watched him scatter breadcrumbs at the defiant care of someone who had lived long enough to know which rules deserved breaking. "Beautiful day for rebellion," he said, noticing her watching. Amelia looked at him more carefully. He was probably her age, maybe older, wearing a worn leather jacket and jeans that suggested he didn't spend his holidays in careful choreography around other people's expectations. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Lady, it's Thanksgiving afternoon, and you're sitting alone by a river in a dress that costs more than my monthly electric bill. Either you're rebelling against something or you're running from it." Sometimes there's not much difference. His observation was uncomfortably accurate. Amelia pulled her coat tighter against the November wind. What are you rebelling against? Same thing as you, I'd guess. The assumption that just because we're older means we should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention our families throw our way. The words hit her like recognition, sharp and sudden. This stranger had diagnosed her situation with more clarity than she'd managed herself. Jeremy Momoa, he said, extending a weathered hand. Retired firefighter. Professional disappointment to my 3 daughters, who think I should spend my golden years being grateful they let me babysit their kids. Amelia Field, she replied, surprising herself by shaking his hand. Professional disappointment to my 3 children who think I should spend my golden years being grateful they still invite me to clean up after their holiday meals. Jeremy laughed, a sound with genuine warmth in it. Jesus, they've got you on cleanup duty? That's cold even for ungrateful kids. Dinner rolls from the grocery store, Amelia added, amazed to find herself confessing to a stranger. That was my assigned contribution. After 30 years of hosting Thanksgiving, I've been demoted to day-old bread from the discount rack. Brutal. Jeremy tossed another handful of breadcrumbs to the ducks, who attacked them with more enthusiasm than Amelia had felt about anything in months. What finally made you say no? The question assumed she had said no, which she supposed she had, even if she'd done it through absence rather than confrontation. My son called to tell me to park on the street so I wouldn't inconvenience the important guests. His wife's family apparently merited driveway privileges while I got curb service. Jeremy shook his head. Parking assignments. The ultimate sign you've been demoted from family to staff. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the ducks navigate the shallow water with more grace than Amelia felt navigating her family relationships. The November sun was weak but present, and for the first time in months, she felt something approaching peace. So, what's your plan? Jeremy asked eventually. You can't sit by this river forever, much as the ducks might appreciate the company. I don't have a plan, Amelia admitted. This morning I had a lie about having other plans, and this afternoon I have this. This isn't nothing, Jeremy said. This is the first Thanksgiving in probably decades where you're doing exactly what you want to do instead of what someone else expects you to do. That's something. Her phone buzzed with another text from Steve. Mom, please call me back. Daisy made your green bean casserole, but it doesn't taste right. The kids keep asking where you are. Amelia stared at the message, parsing its layers of manipulation. They had made her casserole badly, apparently, and now the children were asking for her, not because they missed her presence, but because the food wasn't right without her expertise. Family drama, Jeremy asked, noticing her expression. They made my green bean casserole. It doesn't taste right without me there to make it properly. The old we need you, but only for your labor gambit. Classic. Amelia looked at him sharply. You sound like you have experience with this. 23 years of showing up to family events where my primary value was fixing things that broke and staying quiet while everyone else made decisions about my life took me until I was 71 to realize I didn't have to accept that role just because they assigned it to me. What changed? Jeremy's expression grew serious. Last Christmas, my oldest daughter informed me that they were concerned about me living alone, that they'd found a nice assisted living place where I could have community and activities. They toured it without me, put down a deposit without asking, and presented it as a done deal, wrapped up with a bow. Amelia felt her stomach drop. She could imagine the scene, the careful presentation of research and concern, the assumption that his opinion was less important than their peace of mind. What did you do? I told them I appreciated their concern, but I wasn't ready for assisted living. They got upset, said I was being stubborn and selfish, that I didn't appreciate how much they worried about me, made me feel guilty for wanting to stay in my own home. But you stayed.
I stayed. And you know what happened? They stopped calling every week to check on me, stopped including me in family group chats, made it clear that if I wasn't going to accept their solution to the problem of my independence, they weren't going to waste time managing their worry about me. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I'm sorry. Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me. Turns out when you stop being available for other people's plans for your life, you discover what your life actually is. Jeremy stood, brushing breadcrumbs from his hands. Come on, let me buy you Thanksgiving dinner. I couldn't. Lady, it's 4 o'clock on Thanksgiving, and we're both sitting by a river instead of pretending to be grateful for whatever emotional scraps our families are willing to toss our way. The least we can do is get some decent food and toast our mutual rebellion. Amelia found herself standing, smoothing her dress, feeling more present in her own body than she had in months. Where? There's a diner about 10 minutes from here, Jasmine's place. She stays open on holidays for people like us, the ones who don't fit into Norman Rockwell paintings, but still deserve to eat something that doesn't come from a microwave. As they walked toward their cars, Amelia's phone rang again. Francine this time. Mom, where are you? Steve said you had other plans, but wouldn't say what. We're all worried. Worried? Amelia almost laughed at the audacity of it. They were worried because her absence had created an inconvenience, because her casserole tasted wrong and there was no one to handle cleanup. They were worried the way you worry about a missing appliance, not a missing person. I'm having dinner with a friend, Amelia said, looking at Jeremy, who nodded approvingly. What friend? You didn't mention any friend. The assumption that Amelia's social life should be an open book, subject to family oversight and approval, wrinkled. A new friend. Mom, this is really unlike you. Just be careful, okay? And call me later so I know you're safe. Amelia ended the call without promising anything. Jeremy was already in his truck, a battered Ford that looked like it had seen actual use instead of careful garage storage. Follow me, he called through his window. And Amelia, turn your phone off. Whatever crisis they think they're having can wait until after we've had pie. As she followed Jeremy through the quiet streets of Columbus, Amelia caught glimpses of other families through lit windows, crowded tables, and animated conversations. The warm chaos of people who belonged to each other without condition or assignment. She had spent so many years trying to create that warmth for her own family that she had forgotten what it felt like to receive it. Jasmine's place was exactly what Jeremy had promised, a small diner with cracked vinyl booths and a neon sign that flickered intermittently. Through the windows, she could see other solitary diners in small groups, people who had chosen to spend their holidays somewhere other than the prescribed celebration of family obligation. Amelia parked next to Jeremy's truck and turned off her phone, cutting the electronic tether that had kept her available for other people's emergencies and expectations. The silence felt revolutionary. Jasmine's place served Thanksgiving dinner with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that holidays weren't always celebrations. Amelia sat across from Jeremy in a booth that had probably witnessed decades of similar refuge seekers, picking at turkey that was better than anything she could have managed in her small apartment kitchen. So, Jeremy said, cutting into his mashed potatoes with the deliberate movements of someone who had learned to savor simple pleasures. What's the plan for when you go home tonight? Because they're gonna come at you hard. Amelia had been avoiding that exact question, but Jeremy's directness demanded honesty. I don't know. I've never just not shown up before. First time's always the hardest. Like jumping off a diving board. Terrifying until you realize the water doesn't kill you. What if it does kill me? What if they decide I'm too much trouble and just stop? Jeremy set down his fork and looked at her with the kind of steady attention she hadn't received from her own family in years. Amelia, let me ask you something. When was the last time one of your kids called just to hear your voice? Not because they needed something, not because there was a holiday or a birthday or logistics to coordinate, just because they missed talking to their mother. The question hung in the air like smoke. Amelia tried to remember, scrolling back through months of conversations that had all followed the same pattern. Brief exchanges about schedules, weather, the children's activities, efficient communication designed to maintain connection without requiring actual intimacy. I can't remember, she admitted finally. Right. So, what exactly are you afraid of losing? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've already lost the relationship you're trying so hard to protect. The observation landed with surgical precision. Amelia had been clinging to the scraps of family connection, the holiday invitations, the perfunctory phone calls, the tolerated presence, as if they were evidence of love rather than habit. But love wasn't supposed to feel like gratitude for basic consideration. My daughter-in-law once told me I was lucky they included me in so much, Amelia said, the memory surfacing with unexpected clarity. She said some families just put their elderly parents in homes and forget about them, like I should be grateful for dinner roll assignments. Jesus. Jeremy shook his head. The bar for decent treatment gets lower every year, doesn't it? Next, they'll expect you to thank them for remembering your name. Amelia's phone, despite being turned off, seemed to pulse with phantom weight in her purse. She could imagine the conversations happening at Steve's house right now. The worried murmurs about her strange behavior, the speculation about her mental state, the careful positioning of their concern as evidence of their devotion rather than acknowledgement of their neglect. Jeremy, she said suddenly, how did you do it? How did you actually stop accepting their version of your life? He leaned back in the booth, considering. Started small. Stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Stopped explaining my decisions like I needed their permission to make them. Stopped being available every time they had a crisis that somehow required my labor, but not my input. And they were angry? Oh, they were furious. Kept talking about how I changed, like change was inherently bad. Like the version of me that accepted whatever they dished out was the only acceptable version. The waitress, Jasmine herself, Amelia assumed, refilled her coffee cups with the practiced movements of someone who had been doing this for decades. She was probably Amelia's age, maybe older, but there was something solid and unapologetic about her presence that Amelia envied. You two are having quite the serious conversation for Thanksgiving, Jasmine observed, not unkindly. Family drama, Jeremy explained. Amelia here just skipped her first holiday gathering in probably 30 years. Good for you, Jasmine said to Amelia with immediate approval. Family is supposed to be a blessing, not a burden. When it starts feeling like work, it's time to reevaluate. The casual validation from this stranger felt more genuine than anything Amelia had received from her own family in months. Here was a woman who didn't know her history, her sacrifices, her careful management of everyone else's comfort, and yet she offered support without requiring explanation or justification. How do you know when it's time? Amelia asked. When you start dreading the phone ringing because you know it means someone needs something from you. When you catch yourself apologizing for existing. When you realize you're performing gratitude for treatment that would be unacceptable coming from strangers. Jasmine moved on to other tables, but her words lingered. Amelia thought about the last 6 months. The careful modulation of her voice when Steve called. The way she prepared for interactions with Daisy like diplomatic negotiations. The constant internal calculation of whether her presence was welcome or merely tolerated. She's right, Jeremy said. You've been performing gratitude. I can see it in how you talk about them, like you're lucky they acknowledge you at all, instead of furious that they treat you like hired help. Amelia's throat tightened. I raised them. I sacrificed everything. My career, my dreams, my financial security. I gave them the best years of my life. And now they act like my continued existence is an inconvenience they manage out of obligation. And you let them. The words stung because they were true. She had let them reduce her to a supporting character in her own family's story, had accepted less and less until she had trained them to see her as dispensable. So what do I do now? Jeremy smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Now you stop letting them. You figure out what your life actually looks like when it's not organized around their needs and expectations.
I don't even know what that means anymore. It means you wake up tomorrow and instead of checking your phone to see what crisis needs your attention, you ask yourself what would make you happy. It means you stop being available for every emergency that isn't actually an emergency. It means you remember that you are a whole person, not just their mother. Amelia tried to imagine it, days that belonged entirely to her, decisions made for her own pleasure rather than others' convenience. The concept felt foreign and exhilarating and terrifying. They'll say I'm being selfish. Good, you've been selfless for 62 years. Time to try the alternative. As if summoned by their conversation, Amelia's phone began vibrating in her purse, despite being turned off. Or perhaps she had unconsciously turned it back on. The caller ID showed Steve's number. Don't answer it, Jeremy said immediately. What if something's wrong? Something is wrong. They're realizing they can't take you for granted anymore and they don't like you. That's not your emergency to solve. Amelia stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. Within seconds, it started again. Francine. This is how it starts, Jeremy explained. The escalation. They'll call and text and show up at your door if necessary because the system only works if you participate. When you stop playing your assigned role, they panic. The phone rang a third time. Daisy's number appeared on the screen, which was unprecedented. Daisy never called Amelia directly. All communication flowed through Steve, as if Amelia's daughter-in-law couldn't be bothered with unfiltered contact. Answer this one, Jeremy said unexpectedly. But, putting on speaker, I want to hear how they're planning to handle your rebellion. Amelia looked at him uncertainly, then swiped to accept the call, her thumb hovering over the speaker button. Amelia? Daisy's voice carried a tone Amelia had never heard before. Uncertain, almost plaintive. Thank goodness. We've been so worried. Steve said you had other plans, but when you didn't answer your phone... Amelia pressed the speaker button, and Daisy's voice filled the small booth. I'm fine, Daisy. I'm having dinner with a friend. Oh, well, that's wonderful. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. The children kept asking about your green bean casserole, and when we tried to make it from memory, it just wasn't the same. Jeremy rolled his eyes and made a jerking off motion with his hand. Amelia had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. I'm sorry it didn't turn out, Amelia said, her voice carefully neutral. Well, maybe next year you could write down the exact recipe. I mean, I know you've been making it forever, but some of us need more detailed instructions. The audacity was breathtaking. Even in apology, Daisy was positioning herself as the victim of Amelia's inadequate documentation rather than acknowledging that she had dismissed the dish entirely. Actually, Daisy, Amelia said, surprising herself, I don't think I'll be doing Thanksgiving next year. The silence that followed was profound. Jeremy grinned and gave her a thumbs up. What do you mean? Daisy's voice had lost its false warmth, becoming sharp with alarm. I mean, I think it's time for someone else to take responsibility for the family holidays. You've done such a beautiful job organizing everything. I'm sure you don't need my help anymore. But you've always... I mean, the children expect... The children will adapt. They're resilient. Amelia could hear muffled conversation in the background. Daisy covering the phone to consult with Steve, probably planning their next approach. Amelia, let me put Steve on. Actually, Daisy, I need to go. My friend and I are having dessert. Tell everyone I hope they had a lovely meal.
Amelia hung up before Daisy could respond, her heart pounding with the adrenaline of the truly unexpected. She had never, in all the years since Steve married Daisy, hung up on her daughter-in-law. Jeremy was beaming. Now that, he said, was beautiful. The siege began at 7 the next morning. Amelia woke to pounding on her apartment door, the urgent rhythm of someone who believed their need superseded basic courtesy. Through the peephole, she could see Steve's distorted face, his expression a mixture of frustration and what he probably thought was concern. She made coffee first, let him pound. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of her phone ringing from the kitchen counter. She ignored that too, moving through her morning routine with deliberate calm. Shower, dress, toast with jam she had bought for herself, not because someone needed her to provide breakfast. By the time she opened the door, Steve looked like a man whose fundamental understanding of the universe had been challenged. "Jesus, Mom, why didn't you answer? I was about to call the police." "Good morning, Steve. Would you like some coffee?" Her tone was pleasant, conversational, giving no acknowledgement to his panic or validation for his assumption that her time belonged to him. She could see him recalibrating, trying to figure out why his emergency wasn't being treated as one. "Mom, we need to talk. Yesterday was... Daisy's really upset. The kids kept asking where you were, and Robin started crying because she said you didn't love us anymore." Amelia poured herself a second cup of coffee, noting that he hadn't actually answered her offer of hospitality. "Robin is 12. She'll recover from the disappointment of imperfect green bean casserole." "It's not about the casserole," Steve said, though they both knew it partially was. "It's about family, about traditions, about showing up for the people who matter to you." The words landed exactly where he intended them to, right in the soft spot where Amelia stored her guilt about prioritizing her own needs over others' expectations. But something had shifted since yesterday.
The guilt was still there, but it no longer felt like truth. "Steve," she said, settling into her small armchair while he remained standing. "When was the last time any of you showed up for something that mattered to me?" "What do you mean? We're always..." "When was the last time one of you came to my birthday dinner? Not a phone call or a card, actual presence." Steve's mouth opened, then closed. Amelia could see him mentally scrolling through recent years, probably realizing that her birthday had become another logistics item to manage rather than a celebration to attend. "We're busy, Mom. You know that. Work and the kids." "And I was busy too for 37 years. Somehow I managed to make everyone else's milestones feel important." She watched him absorb this, seeing the moment when he realized that his justification sounded hollow, even to him. But instead of acknowledgement, she saw something harder settle across his features, the look of someone who had been inconvenienced by being asked to examine their behavior. "So what? This is punishment? You're going to skip family events because you're mad about birthday dinners?" The casual dismissal of her point, the reduction of her concerns to petty grievance, might have worked 6 months ago. Today, it felt like confirmation that she had made the right choice. "I'm not skipping anything, Steve. I'm choosing how to spend my time, just like you do." "That's not the same thing, isn't it?" Her phone rang from the kitchen. Francine's ringtone. Amelia made no move to answer it. "Are you going to get that?" "No." "What if it's important?" "If it's genuinely important, a medical emergency, an actual crisis, she'll call 911, not me. If it's about her feelings regarding my absence from yesterday's dinner, it can wait." Steve stared at her as if she had announced her intention to join a cult. The woman sitting calmly in her chair, drinking coffee and refusing to be moved by artificial urgency, was clearly not the mother he remembered. "Mom, this isn't like you." "You're right. The Mimi you're familiar with would have already apologized 3 times and promised to make it up to everyone. That version of me spent 62 years managing other people's emotions at the expense of her own. I'm trying something different." "You're being selfish." There it was.
the word Jeremy had predicted they would use, deployed like a weapon designed to trigger her compliance reflex. Amelia felt the familiar flutter of panic, the trained response to accusations of inadequate selflessness. But underneath it was something newer and steadier, the recognition that caring for herself wasn't actually a moral failing. "Yes," she said simply, "I am." Steve's face went through several expressions: surprise, irritation, something that might have been respect, before settling back into frustrated confusion. "I don't understand what's gotten into you." "Nothing's gotten into me. Maybe something's gotten out of me. The part that believed my worth was determined by how much inconvenience I was willing to accept." Her phone rang again. This time it was James, her youngest, calling from medical school. Amelia felt a flicker of genuine concern. James rarely called during his clinical rotations unless something was actually wrong. "I should take this one," she said, reaching for the phone. "Mom?" James's voice carried exhaustion and something that sounded like tears. "Francine told me about yesterday. Are you okay? She said you just disappeared, that no one knows where you went." The genuine concern in his voice was so different from Steve's accusatory panic that Amelia felt her chest tighten. This was what authentic concern sounded like, focused on her well-being rather than the inconvenience of her choices. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I had dinner with a friend." "What friend? I didn't know you had... you never mentioned." The assumption that she had no independent social life stung, but she could hear that James was processing it as worry rather than control. "A new friend, someone I met yesterday on Thanksgiving." "Mom, that sounds... Are you sure this person is safe?" The question was fair, coming from someone who actually cared about her safety rather than her availability for family service. "He's a retired firefighter named Jeremy. We had dinner at a place called Jasmine's and talked about what it's like when your children start treating you like a burden instead of a person." Silence. She could hear James breathing, probably sitting in some hospital break room trying to process this information between the grinding demands of his residency. "Do we do that? Treat you like a burden?" The question was so direct, so lacking in defensiveness, that Amelia felt tears threaten for the first time since this whole confrontation began.
"Sometimes," she said honestly. "Not you as much as the others, but yes, sometimes." Steve, who had been listening to her half of the conversation with growing agitation, made a sharp gesture of protest. Amelia held up her hand to silence him. "I'm sorry," James said. "I didn't realize. I've been so focused on school and I guess I assumed you were happy with how things were. I wasn't. I'm not. But that's not entirely your fault. I never told you I wasn't happy. I just performed happiness until I forgot what the real thing felt like. What can I do?" The simple offer, free of conditions or justifications, made Amelia's throat close with unexpected emotion. This was what love actually sounded like, not the careful management of obligations, but the immediate impulse to repair and improve. "Just, when you call me, ask how I am and wait for the real answer. Visit when you can, not because you should, but because you want to see me. Remember that I'm not just your mother. I'm a person with feelings and needs and dreams that might not center around your lives." "I can do that," James said. "I want to do that, Mom. I love you not because of what you do for us, but because of who you are." Amelia had to cover her mouth to keep from sobbing. When was the last time one of her children had told her they loved her without it being attached to a request or an expectation? "I love you too, James, so much. I have to go. My attending is looking for me. But Mom, I'm proud of you for yesterday. It sounds like you're finally taking care of yourself." After he hung up, Amelia sat in silence for a moment, holding the phone like a lifeline. Steve was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He gets it," Steve said finally.
James understands what you're doing. Yes, and the rest of us don't. Amelia looked at her eldest son, the child she had rocked through nightmares, taught to drive, helped through his divorce, and felt the complex weight of truth. Steve, I want you to understand. I want all of you to understand, but I'm not going to shrink myself back down to make that easier for you. The version of me that accepted dinner roll assignments and parking restrictions and cleanup duty without complaint, she's gone. If you want a relationship with who I actually am, we'll figure out what that looks like. If you only want the version of me that makes your life easier, then we don't really have much to work with. Steve absorbed this, his face cycling through emotions like weather systems. Finally, he sank into her small couch, looking older than his 37 years. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Daisy and we have everything so organized, so planned. You not fitting into that plan feels like chaos. Yeah. Amelia felt something soften in her chest. Not enough to return to her old role, but enough to recognize that change was hard for everyone, even the people who had benefited from the old arrangements. Steve, I'm not trying to create chaos. I'm trying to create space for myself to exist as something other than your support staff. Maybe we can figure out what family looks like when everyone gets to be a whole person instead of just playing their assigned role. He nodded slowly, though she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Change would require him to examine not just her role in their family dynamic, but his own and Daisy's and Francine's. It would require acknowledging that their perfectly organized system had been built on Amelia's systematic diminishment. What about Christmas? He asked finally. Amelia smiled, feeling something like freedom expand in her chest. What about it? Are you going? Will you? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring out what my holidays look like when they're actually mine to design. The uncertainty clearly made him uncomfortable, but Amelia found it exhilarating. For the first time in decades, her calendar belonged to her. After Steve left, confused but somewhat less hostile, Amelia sat in her quiet apartment and made a list, not of obligations or expectations, but of possibilities, things she might want to do, places she might want to go, ways she might want to spend the time that had suddenly become entirely her own. At the top of the list, she wrote, "Call Jeremy," because revolution, she was learning, was better shared than endured alone, and Amelia Field was just getting started. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.